Thank you, Mark. Thanks, everybody. Yeah, it's amazing what happens when you switch on the lights. I was wondering when they were going to start bringing out the candles for the little mood we had here. It's great to be here, and I just have to acknowledge the long time that Washoe has been using the framework for teaching. You were one of the early adopters. The fact that you're still at it is a tribute. Well, I appreciate it. I mean, it speaks well of your fortitude, but it also is reassuring to me that it continues to be useful to you. So I love that. But I know that you've had various research studies done. I knew Lynn when she was here as in professional development, and then we started working together more through the Danielson group when she decided to retire from Washoe County. But let me give you a little bit of background on the framework for teaching. You probably know most of it, but I hope this will serve just to review. As you know, of course, there are the 4 domains, and each of them is divided into either 5 or 6 components. Let me say a few words about the framework for teaching at the risk of telling you stuff you know, but it's important for this project in the sense that the underlying concepts of the framework we share some important assumptions with the authors of the Common Core, and I'd like to just make sure that those are established. First of all, any framework for teaching like this, whatever its source, is grounded in some assumptions about both teaching and learning. Now, typically, the authors of these instructional frameworks are not explicit about what those assumptions are, and sometimes they seem to be just lists of good practices. But I did make these explicit, and I'd like to be sure you understand them. Let me just ask you a question. Is this mic doing weird things? Is it? Is it all right? Okay. Maybe I'm just getting feedback. Okay, sorry. Okay, so first of all, the assumptions about learning, student learning. You know, cognitive scientists don't agree on everything. There is one thing they do agree on. It has to do with the nature of learning. And it's this, and we can say it in one sentence. Learning is done by the learner through an active intellectual process, period. And it seems so obvious that it's even dumb to say it, but you know, we sometimes overlook that. And sometimes we think that when we're engaging with teachers around what they do, we're interested in what they're doing. But actually, what the teachers do in their practice is reflected in what the students do. And so when I observe in a classroom, I of course care what the teacher's doing. I really care what the students are doing. What's the nature of the task we're asking them to do? What is the intellectual rigor? What is their cognitive engagement? What is their engagement with one another? That's where the learning happens, and that's the contribution of cognitive science to our work as teachers. So that's a very important assumption, and it plays out all over in the framework. The centerpiece of the framework for teaching, as you almost certainly know, is 3C, the engaging students in learning. That's the heart of it, the core of it. The other components support that. So that's the big assumption about learning. The big assumption about teaching has to do with that teaching is enormously complex work. That teachers make, literally, people have counted this, hundreds of decisions a day. Often under, I'm sure I don't have to tell you this, unfavorable circumstances. You know, like in a hurry, right? Or based on incomplete information. And so we've always known that teaching was demanding physical work. You know, you run around a lot and you're up and this school you could, you know, be on the track team, right? Just getting from one place to the other. I mean, it's demanding physical work. It's very demanding emotional work. But here's what we have discovered as a profession a little bit more recently, that it's also challenging intellectual work. That, in other words, teaching is a thinking person's job. And so any definition of teaching has to reflect these two things about both teaching and learning. That it's demanding intellectual work and purposeful work, and that it's also that I define teaching as that which causes learning, and we know that that which causes learning is active intellectual engagement. So then when we get to these components then, they're not just a list of things, they are related to each other in a couple of interesting ways. And again, at the risk of repeating things that you know, I'll just observe that domains 2 and 3 happen in the classroom. You can see them. Domains 1 and 4 are equally important to good teaching, but they happen behind the scenes, sort of right there off stage. That domain 1 in planning and preparation, and domain 4, all the other professional responsibilities, are critical to good teaching, but you never see them. You might see indirect evidence of planning in the classroom, but you don't see it the way you would see the components in domains 2 and 3. So there's that. Let me say a couple of things also that sometimes people look at these and they say, well, this is okay, this framework, but you're missing some things. Like they'll say, where's technology? Has that gone missing? Where's high expectations? Those are aspects of teaching that I called common themes. And they are not components of teaching, not because they're not important, they are, but because they don't describe the work of teaching. See, the framework for teaching, the components describe the work of teaching, what teachers do. The common themes, and they're things like high expectations, equity, culturally responsive teaching, etc., use of technology, those reflect not what teachers do, but the manner in which they do what they do. So, for example, a teacher who holds high expectations for student learning, let me see if I can make this work, those high expectations are reflected in the outcomes they set, right? Or the questions they frame. They're at a high cognitive level, or the feedback they give to students, and so on. That is, the high expectations play out through the components, as does something like the use of technology. And a very interesting conversation to have, if you've not done it, is to ask this question. To which of these components would, let's say, the use of technology, would it enhance it? It's not going to be all of them, but it'll be a number. And then the part of the question that's really interesting is not only which ones would it enhance, but how. In what way? How would it make it better? Those are very interesting professional conversations, and if you've not had them, I urge you to. And I will say one last thing about this framework. I would not want you to think that I think that because these aspects of teaching are listed separately, they're described separately, I wouldn't want you to think that I think that teachers do them separately. Of course not. Of course not. Teaching is very intertwined and entangled, and that you can illustrate too, is to pick any one. Let's say questioning and discussion techniques. If a teacher were really good at that, which others of these components would that teacher have to be good at also in order to be good at that? Well, they'd obviously have to know their subject, right, to know what's an interesting question. They'd have to know their students. What's an appropriately challenging question for this group or this individual? They'd have to have clear outcomes. What do I want the kids to learn from this? And they'd have things over here in domain 2 about an environment of respect where it's a safe place for students to take an intellectual risk. There would be procedures. Do you raise your hand? Do you not? And so on. And so the framework is all intertwined like that. And so then you might ask, well, why list them out separately then at all? And here's the answer to that, and this is what plays into this project, that I think of the framework sort of like, think of a theater in the round. Now, in a theater in the round, you've got the play in the middle, right? And it's a theater in the round, so the audience is sitting all around. Because the audience is sitting all around, the lights have to come from all directions. I think of these components like the lights. Here's the lesson, but let's just focus on the questioning skills, or on the routines, or on the interactions, whatever, right? So when you think of it that way, then this framework becomes an analytic tool. And in a sense, that's really all it is. It's an analytic tool to understand good teaching. And I think an additional benefit of it, like any other framework, is that it offers a common language and a shared understanding about good practice, which enables educators, teachers and supervisors and lead teachers to have shared conversation, professional conversation where they understand what they're talking about. Okay, so now my interest in this project has to do with the role then that the Common Core is playing, and let's just really clarify one point here. The Common Core state standards have to do with what we want students to learn to be college and career ready. The framework for teaching has to do with how teachers help kids learn. And so they're not addressing the same thing, although they're clearly related. And the Common Core is stepping it up. We do know that. And so then the question for me is, and all of us in one sense, is what do we have to do? Do we in fact have to do anything differently than what we always have done to ensure that kids will achieve the outcomes we want in the Common Core? That requires a good, hard look at how we define good teaching. And I've taken one crack at this already. I've looked at the framework and I've said, well, okay, of these 22 components, which ones of them do I think, and I've had many conversations with people, do we think would be most appropriately tied to instructional practice in the Common Core? And the ones that are in red are the ones we've identified. And so for the latest version of the framework, and it has evolved over time, as it's been subject to a number of, and been involved in a number of research studies that have helped it be tightened, the language tightened, the addition of critical attributes, etc. But this is the latest now. Does it need further evolution to respond to the demands of the Common Core? I'm sure the answer to that's yes. So the ones in red are the ones that I've already concluded need some adaptation, and those have been made for the 2013 version of the framework. But I did that without the benefit of this project or the engagement of practitioners in reflecting on what they actually do. We just looked at what the Common Core says and what the framework said, and worked on revising some language. I'm expecting fully that there will be practices and patterns of practice that are revealed in the Common Core, the Instructional Practice Guides, that are not yet captured in the framework. And as much as I hate the idea of another major rewrite of the framework, I have to accept that it will at least be a minor rewrite. And I welcome that, frankly. But let's also be clear about one other thing. The Common Core state standards are discipline-specific. They're ELA literacy and mathematics so far. My framework for teaching is generic. And so what that means is that the manner in which the instructional implications of the Common Core are reflected in the framework have to respect that distinction. So there are some things that will be generic, like the deep understanding, deep conceptual understanding is an important idea in the Common Core. That's always been part of the framework. Intellectual rigor has always been part of the framework. Argumentation, precision in thought and language has always been part of the framework. But the specific practices in ELA and literacy, of course, have not been. And we'll have to figure out together how best to weave those in. And it may be through a series of examples, through scenarios, I'm not sure. That's why I'm here, and I welcome this opportunity to work with all of you and to learn from you. Because this work with the framework has been humbling. It's been long already, and sometimes I wonder how much longer can I do this. But I really appreciate your long involvement with it and your patience as it's gotten better, and I just value your engagement with it. So I think we're going to move on and hear a little bit from Student Achievement Partners. So thank you so much.